Contact with everybody. So there's been a lot going on, and yesterday, of course, the 20th anniversary of September 11th. I think most all of us who are of at least a certain minimum age can recall where we were at the times in which those events were happening. One of the things that I find interesting, in fact, a conversation I had yesterday touched on this, is issues of proximity. As an American, certainly I experienced the attacks as an attack on our nation. But I know this may sound bizarre here in Palo Alto, but I have never been to New York City in my life. I'm from the upper Midwest. I don't have any family back east. I do not know anybody remotely associated with the events. And it's interesting to me how when something tragic happens, obviously there are scales of proximity. It's one thing if somebody dies in a car accident somewhere else, but when it's somebody in your immediate family, suddenly that's a different order of magnitude, right? Suddenly there's that immediate sense of proximity. And when we are hurt, we often respond in different ways, right? Depending on how healthy we are, perhaps, maybe our backgrounds, various things, we might express our response to trauma in certain ways. And if we come from a strained background with maybe lack of support in various ways, we may respond differently. It may be a response of grief, a response of lashing out, and there may be, depending on the scale of the trauma, a period of time like a wake after a boat, right? That it may take quite a while for those waves to kind of relax. 20 years. It feels like we're still kind of bobbing. We've kind of gone from one thing to the next, the pandemic being the most recent part, but it's hard to look at this whole scale of history over the last 20 years and not put it up against our departure from Afghanistan in the last few weeks. 20 years of war. World War II was 4 years on our part, but we were at war in Afghanistan for 20 years, 5 times as long. Do we all feel safer today? Dynamics have changed, situations have changed, and we continue to bob in the wake of these things, particularly those of us maybe closer to the attack than perhaps others. But a sense that there's always this kind of up and down. Yesterday, one of the articles that I read about the anniversary in the New York Times was fascinating. Their lead image was of the front page of the New York Times on September 11th. It's a different universe that day, before the attacks, right? When everything was published, it was like a window to a different era that no longer exists. And in our time and place, we seem to be bobbing up and down still in the wake of what comes. Almost nothing can be viewed outside of that lens. Even the way in which our politics respond to pandemic and any number of things, kind of part of this bobbing up and down. And when we get hurt, often as human beings, we want to respond in our human sense of strength, right? There's a sense of wanting to lash out, to punish, deter, perhaps. Whatever the case might be, as human beings, we have a kind of a set sense of what that is. Strength. Brings us to our gospel text, actually. So in the gospel text that we have for today, Jesus is doing an informal poll with his 12 inside crew there and saying, what are people saying about me? What's our brand out here as we move to various places? And they say, well, some people think you're John the Baptist come back. Some people think you're Elijah or one of the prophets. And then Jesus dials it in a little closer. But who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? And Peter, Mr. talk first, think later, jumps right into the gap and says, "You are the Messiah." Wow. Now, in 2021, we look back and say, well, of course he's the Messiah. It's Jesus, right? That was not immediately obvious in that time and place. But what's important to remember, I think, over and against our current history and news cycles, is that there was an understood definition of what the Messiah was. The Messiah is someone who was the one to inherit the legacy of King David. This is someone with a shield and a sword, somebody who will lead armies, who will bring the nation to strength by force. It was understood. In an American context, the translation would not be to, like, say, the Pope or something, but more of like a George Washington kind of figure. It was very understood who the Messiah was going to be. Jesus does not deny it, but then moves on basically to say, but let me tell you who the Messiah really is. One who will serve others in a sacrificial way. One who will serve in a sacrificial way that will cost them their life. And in 3 days, rise again. Well, that doesn't sound very glorious. That doesn't sound very strong. In human stories, that's how you know you have lost, right? It's by definition, the loser. Peter responds by saying, hey, that doesn't sound anywhere near as fun as my plan. I'd like to lay it out for you. My plan is that we gather an army and we are conquering heroes in Jerusalem. That's what we want. We're going to take this place back. Through the centuries, we have seen this sense of strength through arms and force. It was fascinating finishing up Dan Jones's book Crusaders over and against the wrap down of the war in Afghanistan, and how the term crusader comes up from our own president after 9/11, although carefully not repeated too often, but also from our adversaries, referring to the West as crusaders, just in our time. This sense of strength, or those who have lifted the cross in tunics as they marched from Western Europe to the Middle East. This sense that God has called the Messiah to bring by use of force righteousness to the land. Peter likes that idea. Jesus, not so much a fan of it. And you'll notice Jesus' teaching style. Normally, in rabbinical practice, you might respond to a question with a question and challenge the hearer to explain themselves further. But instead, Jesus employs a subtle line. Get behind me, Satan. Just in case it's not clear, if you're a disciple of a rabbi, that's not a good phrase from the teacher. This sense of being slapped down, this sense that God calls us in the wake of the traumas of this life to respond in ways that are not about the human understanding of strength and power over others, but rather that we are called to serve in love, even if that is at cost to us. The theologian and pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was part of the opposition in Nazi Germany, the title of his book, in English though, curiously not in German, but in English the title is The Cost of Discipleship. The cost of following Christ. There is a cost. There is a bearing our own cross, as we hear. Which is not that I've got arthritis in my knee and I guess that's my cross to bear. The idea is that in following Christ, there is a burden and a cost for the sake of the gospel. And that cost is borne in a life of service and love toward those around us, even those that we may wake up in the morning and feel don't deserve it. That is when we bear that cost. It is not for our own glory to exercise power over others at the cost of their life, but rather a life lived in love towards others, perhaps at times even at cost to ours. So as you move through this wake and continue to ride through it as we move through these years and this life that is ours, be mindful that the Messiah has come, that we are called to follow, that in following Christ, there may be challenges, but there is love in being near the Messiah. Amen.